Good afternoon from rainy New Jersey. Thank you to everyone joining us today from across the country and around the world. And for those who celebrated Labor Day, I hope you had a wonderful long weekend. I'm Quennie, Partner Success Manager here at Conscious Capitalism, Inc. And on behalf of the entire CCI team, we appreciate you taking the time to learn and grow in community with us. Conscious Capitalism, Inc. is a nonprofit organization dedicated to catalyzing the movement by creating learning opportunities like today's session and building systems of support for practicing conscious capitalists through interactive programming in our senior leader network, engagement in our local region, in your local region through our chapters, and in-person events like our CEO Summit, for example. As many of you know, conscious capitalism is a philosophy that emphasizes the human nature of business, as well as a movement of business leaders from around the world working to change the practice and perception of capitalism as a means to elevate humanity. Several times a month, we offer virtual gatherings as a way for the community to see how this philosophy takes shape in the leadership journeys and the business practices of those in our network. Today, we are excited to welcome Chris Gomez, CEO of Barrett Values Centre, to discuss creating conscious cultures for remote teams. This session will run for about 45 minutes. We will be in conversation with Chris for about 25 of those minutes, and then transition to the audience for questions during the last 10 to 15 minutes. Please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get to as many of your questions as we can during our time together. If you're having any technical issues, please email us at info@consciouscapitalism.org, and one of our team members will be there to assist. This session is also being recorded and will be available on our website under the events page. Now, I am honored to introduce Chris Gomez. As CEO of Barrett Values Centre, Chris supports leaders and organizations to align culture and strategy, create well-being and sustainable futures for all his stakeholders. Chris joined Barrett Values Centre in 1998 as the Director of Information Technology. In 2017, he became the CEO and is responsible for the mission, the vision, the strategy, and the culture of the company, leading employees in the United Kingdom, Spain, and the United States. He graduated from the University of Virginia with a Bachelor of Science degree in computer science. Welcome, Chris. How are you doing today?
Hi, Queenie. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
So we're just going to jump into the questions because I know this has been a really interesting topic of conversation, and there's a lot of business leaders kind of going through and navigating different aspects of remote culture and evolution. Mm-hmm. So here at Conscious Capitalism, we are familiar with you and your background, but for those joining who aren't familiar with Barrett Values Centre, can you provide a brief overview of the organization, your role there, and how being a conscious leader is key in building a good culture?
Sure, absolutely. So as you said, I joined in 1998, so been doing this for about 25 years. And when we started, it was just Richard Barrett, Joan Schaefer, and myself were the founders of the company. And our mantra was changing the philosophy of business at a global level, like no small task for three people. And we wanted to do that by introducing the importance of values and culture, because that, in the late 90s was not typically a topic of conversation. Fast forward 25 years, we understand culture is important, that we can measure and manage cultures and values and the importance and the role they play in business. So now our kind of leading edge is understanding the need to extend the kind of the bottom line of shareholder value into stakeholder value creation, and helping really leaders and organizations who understand the need to evolve the business model but aren't sure how to get there. We help them with that process to build that bridge to that new business paradigm that many of the people in the audience here are aware of and know that's where we need to go as a society, as business leaders, and we just help them get there through that process.
Oh, that's great. I love that. Stakeholder value creation. So you support companies in creating a thriving culture, and at the same time, you're dedicated to ensuring that your own organization lives by the same values you demonstrate. What do you think is a key step to ensuring a conscious culture helps organizations and their employees thrive?
Oh, sure. So, we talk about inside BVC, eating our own porridge, walking our talk, name your bumper sticker. It's really important to be authentic in the work that we do. And so it's a conscious, not to use a pun, but a conscious conversation that we often have within the organization. And it always starts with purpose. Like, what are we about? And then, the moments when we are thriving as an organization are the moments where, we are aligned and clear on our purpose, in the values and in the culture and the strategy that are integrated together to support that kind of going forward. So, we really are in parallel growing and evolving ourselves as our own organization, while in parallel working with other leaders and organizations and developing their high-performing cultures and organizations.
Yeah, it's really great when the whole organization and all the stakeholders involved are aligned with your purpose. So it's nice to be able to have that common, mission and purpose. So when we first connected, I was intrigued to hear that you had worked remotely and led a remote culture for over 25 years. And I was fascinated by that because, like you said, in the 90s, it just didn't really exist. But it's safe to say that you've been doing this since before it was a norm and it was a cool thing for a company to offer. And recently, this model was really forced onto organizations throughout the pandemic. How was having such a big head start advantageous to your company through the last couple of years?
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting phenomenon because I've been telecommuting for 25 years. So I have not been in a traditional office environment for quite some time. And as people were transitioning through the pandemic to working remotely, working at home, we found our business is less maybe talking about culture and values in terms of like remote working, and lending our expertise, in fact, holding town halls. And in the big theme through that, what we found is important is a sense of connection. The pandemic was taking away was our sense of connection, going into the office, going into social settings and social spaces. So we decided as an organization, well, how can we, knowing that we've done this remote thing and the value of connection is very strong in our organization, can extend that and share some of the best practices and some of the things that we've done along the way that have enabled us to be successful. So we held town halls and we even doubled the amount of connective activities within the organization to help people because they weren't able to get out to their other social settings. So connection is the big key theme. So it's almost the juxtaposition to remote, right? So you talk about remote working, but we're social, beings, and connection is incredibly important.
Absolutely. It's hard when you kind of disconnect, and then trying to build that back up is a challenge in itself. So thank you for sharing that. So I can imagine how cultivating a remote culture takes time. I mean, just from what you said, from over the last 25 years, you keep evolving and improving. Since some businesses had to make such a sudden pivot and transition into working from home, what key points do you feel business leaders should focus on when implementing a remote workplace? And can you give an example of what that timeline might look like?
Yeah. Few different kind of components to it. And I think this speaks to remote working and also in-person working, but it becomes more vital in a remote working environment where you don't have those water cooler moments. And it all starts off with a sense of shared purpose. And that's the purpose with the big P. Like, why are we connecting to that on a regular basis? And I've learned as a leader that just as when I think I'm talking about that enough, I'm only doing that probably 50% amount of what I should be talking about. So sharing that sense of purpose, having employees being able to connect into that is a vital piece, because now we understand why we're all together. The timeline, it's a never-ending journey. We constantly work on this. We have some successes and we have some moments of learning down the road of things we've done well and things that we've not executed well. And it's not a tick the box kind of exercise. It's not a policy document. It's not a binary decision. I know I've heard, many leaders that I've spoken with say, yes, we're getting a lot of pushback from staff saying they want to work from home. So we're going to split the difference. They're going to come in 3 days and we'll let them work home for 2 days. And, my counsel to them is, are we really addressing the needs behind the request? And are we really understanding the systemic context of what our employees are asking for? and what they've learned and what the fallacy of work has been on display for us in COVID is, yes, you can be productive at home. Yes, you can have these things and, be a high performing organization. So, my offer to leaders who are struggling with this issue is to take a look at a systemic viewpoint of it, and not necessarily as a policy document of remote working. And understanding it's a never-ending journey, and it's a system that needs to be managed and not solved.
That's great, because everybody knows that if you stop learning, then you're in the wrong room, right? So yeah. I do believe that, especially for business leaders, that you actually don't stop learning, and you can learn from your teams, you can learn from each other. So thank you for that. And I do love your kind of stakeholder map on your website, where there's the people, the prosperity, the planet is involved, there's peace and harmony and partnership as well. So I love that. So this question is for our conscious business leaders who want to be more compassionate and empathetic to their employees. Can you share what you think is the most important thing a leader of a remote team should understand to be able to support their workforce in this implementation, and perhaps vice versa for you, for what employees should understand about leadership? Yeah.
I think the big key learning in this for me is that this is one of those paradoxes in business that leaders often have to face. And as leaders, we need to have the ability to understand how do we navigate paradoxes or polarities. It has to be a tool in our toolbox. And so an important first step is understanding that this is not a problem to be solved. This is a paradox to be managed. And, the paradox, to look at is it remote work or is it in the office? Is it working by myself? Or is it working with a team? Am I doing deep focused work on some specific things? Or am I doing connection work with a greater group of people? So a successful organization needs all of those components. It's not a binary choice of or, it's an inclusive choice of and. So that, to me, needs to be the first step of leaders to understand in the context, what is the polarity or the paradox in the system here? And then how do we understand the benefits of both of those situations so that we can create those higher order outcomes, and we can avoid some of the pitfalls of it, kind of an excessive focus on either of those. So that's to me the first step. And every business and every leader is going to face slightly different context, and you have to understand what your environment is. And then from that, you can say, okay, yeah, we can have remote, or we can have in office, we can have individual work, or we can have group collective connective work. I forget with you had a second piece in there that I forgot. What was your question on that?
It was kind of like a vice versa with employees understanding leadership's challenges.
Yeah, thanks for the prompt there. So the second piece to the polarity or the paradox component is understanding the kind of the whole part kind of dynamic. So the employees are part of an organization, and the organization needs the employees. And so, the thing that we often have a check-in and try to understand through our own culture assessments is, what are the needs of the employees and what are the needs of the business? And then how do we align them? And then we have conversations around that. And as I said before, the first step is in that shared purpose. So why are we all here together? And if there's an understanding and I can see myself in the purpose of the organization, now I get to align my needs with the needs of the organization. And those conversations start to happen really naturally. And now you're starting to co-create how we're going to do this. It's not the solution. It's like, but here's where we are now. This is the current environment. How are we going to do this thing together? That's where I find the success tends to be. And the times where I think we're less successful is when, the stakeholder of the organization or the stakeholder of the employees aren't fully present in the conversation, and one is maybe talking to the other without listening. So that would be my advice in that piece, is understand it as a polarity dynamic. And then you need to understand the needs of all your different stakeholders in that relationship. So it's the needs of the natural person, which is your employee, your staff, and the legal person, which is your organization. And both have needs, and both can be met, but they have to be understood. And so I would take steps to understand what those are.
That's great. I mean, that you don't realize that there are needs outside of your own. Sometimes people feel siloed, especially our business leaders at the top, where they're like, how no one's listening to me. So how do I allow my stakeholders and my employees to actually understand my needs as well? So it's good to have that open line all the time. So as I connect with our community members, I found that some business leaders are experiencing continuous hurdles in energizing and motivating their teams. Do you have some tactics that can support leaders in continuing to build those relationships, strengthen those bonds with their employees, as well as between team members in a newly established virtual work environment?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we've had tactics that have worked for us. And I would be reluctant, and maybe some people are going to feel disappointed. I don't have a PowerPoint slide of 5 steps to be successfully, remote worker. It's contextual. Every organization has their unique culture, their own journey and process to go through. My guidance and invitation really is conversation. First, repeating the purpose. And it could be the big purpose of the organization. Maybe it's the smaller purpose of a project team, or the cohort that you're working within. And understanding the needs in that system and having that conversation. And it might seem a little, maybe silly or kind of like, well, we got a lot of work to do. I don't have time for that. But that's the foundational element to really making a cohesive unit work, whether it's even in person or even more challenging environments in a remote environment where I might see you on a transactional basis. So sharing those needs of what I might need as a person, what's the need of the team, and then you'll co-create the tactics. That'll come. And an example is, I have a person in finance. An important part for her is meeting her daughter at the bus stop. I'm not scheduling a meeting from 2 to 3. She's going to meet her daughter at the bus stop, going to have a snack, talk about school, but she's all in. And I know she's going to take care of business, and she might come in early and she might stay a little outside of traditional office hours, but that's really important to her. Are we missing anything vital for that hour? No, not at all. So we recognizing what's really important to her. And now she also understands what's important to the organization and gets those things done in a still a timely manner and is still accountable to the team. So by talking about those things and putting them on the table and being open about it, you'll co-create the tactics that works for your setting.
Mm-hmm. I love that it's kind of a team involved, tactic co-creation. Mm-hmm. It's nice when, you understand and you earn that trust, from each other. So, and having that smaller purpose within the teams, I think that's wonderful, because you do have that higher purpose, but within your own teams, it could be different depending on, that cohort in your projects. So thank you for that. And to build off that challenge, there seems to be some intergenerational differences in the way remote workplaces are perceived and how different generations are willing or maybe unwilling to adopt or adapt to this way of working if they're not used to it. Do you see those differences within generations on how they're perceiving remote culture? And have you seen hesitancies of adopting a remote workplace?
I think it's both generational in both life stage. And it always goes back to sound like a broken record, but it really is. And you talked about it in your introduction, creating a more human-centered organization, right? And humans have needs and organizations also have needs. And so the conversation is ongoing and persistent within conscious organizations. What are the needs in this moment? What are the needs that the culture we need to have going forward to solve those challenges? Some things are generational, and I like to caution some people using the labels of generational, millennials are like this, Gen Z are like that. It's good to identify so we can start to understand, as long as we don't fall into the trap of, oh, you're Gen Z, so you must be this, is my cautionary tale. So we can start from a place of like, well, Gen Z might have some characteristics, but now let's inquire. Let's ask. So we do a culture assessment, say, what's important to you? So we know consistently throughout 25 years, making a difference has always been a key value for the people that work here at Barrett Values Centre. Whether you're, Gen X, Gen Z, millennial, you name it. There are some differences around the edges that we've noticed specifically in the kind of younger generational bands, questioning the system, which is really, I think, really curious, because that's kind of where we are as a society right now. One of the gifts of the pandemic has been showing the fragility and the dysfunction in a system that we thought was okay for the most part. So they're challenging it more. And I think, understanding that questioning, we need to come with patience. We need to come with listening. We need to understand where those questions are coming from, not to necessarily challenge authority, but to challenge the dysfunctional system that, many of the people who are listening to this interview understand needs to be fixed, needs to be transformed into something better. So that's some of the gifts that I think some of the younger generation are bringing. The second component is being connected to social causes. And again, I have two young daughters, 17 and 19, and I think I'm at the age now I'm learning more from them than they are from me. And they're always talking about, like, why is this business not connecting to this social, impact? Where's the value creation in society for what they're doing here? And to me, that is the business question at hand. Our organizations, for the most part, still fixated on high performance shareholder value, and how many of the leaders are understanding what's the impact of that high performance culture on the well-being of our staff, and what's the impact of that high performance culture in creating societal value, right? And so some of those younger generations, are grabbing hold of this disruptive event from the pandemic in particular and saying, no, organizations need to start caring about people. They need to start caring about their impact in society at large. And we're just asking questions. And I think it's important as leaders of these organizations, as conscious leaders, to really have to be listening, and not to see it as a challenge to authority, but actually the opening of a door to a new business model.
That's where the learning doesn't stop, right? You're learning, and unfortunately, I mean, I'm not going to give my age away, but I have no idea what generation I am. So, but the thing is, I still want to open those lines of communication. You're going to learn, you're going to ask. Everyone has different objectives. And like you said, there's so much impact that the younger generation is trying to make and create with socially. And so thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of people are finding, kind of barriered that way. So if they just kind of open their gates, it would help to just listen a little bit. So I know we've been focusing on the challenge of the pivot, but on the opposite side, what opportunities and positive developments have you seen, or do you see, for organizations who are evolving to integrate distributed workplaces?
Yeah, to me, the gift, and this is more of a macro lens, is the invitation for a different business model. I know in the conscious capitalist, philosophy, we're looking to transform the way business is done. And going back to 1997, 98, when we started the Barrett Values Centre to change the philosophy of business at a global level, the current system that we have been working in, shareholder value, important, not diminishing that in the slightest, but it's incomplete at best and it's dysfunctional at worst. So the invitation on the remote workforce really, I think, has highlighted a fallacy that most people have bought into in terms of you can only be productive in an office building. That we've had these rigid paradigms of how business needs to operate, and the pandemic opened the window and said that's not necessarily true. And I think so that's just kind of a symptomatic component to a dysfunctional system that I think, if as conscious leaders we can kind of grab onto and understand, it's like, well, wait a minute, is there a better way of doing this? Have we bought into the dogma of this industrial age kind of business mentality, or is there something better? And I personally believe in the work we do at Barrett Values Centre puts forth that a new business model needs to emerge, one that's more sustainable, that allows all stakeholders to thrive. And and remote work is a symptom of a dysfunctional system that does not allow for human beings to truly flourish. And a term I like to use is to find that work-life harmony, right? So it's not a binary balance of 8 hours here and 8 hours there. It's how do I find harmony in my life? How do I bring my full self to work? How do I have or get rid of the schizophrenic self of who I am at work and who I am at the dinner table with my family, who I am in the community. So this remote work question really is kind of like a small thread that if you pull at it, starts to unravel the business paradigm that we know is to be dysfunctional and is inviting that new business model, that new mental model of a more kind of inclusive stakeholder kind of work-life harmony. Yep.
That's great. And I feel like that involves a lot of our community members when really redesigning their purpose. They're really including their teams now in that. They want to make sure everyone's aligned. So that's amazing. Thank you. And lastly, from me, before we dive into questions from the audience, I wanted to see what advice you would give to business leaders who are struggling on how and where to start or create their thriving remote culture. I mean, they were forced into this, but they're like, I don't know how to navigate it. Perhaps you can give some takeaways with examples.
Sure. First, be gentle with yourself and gentle with your staff, because like you say, a lot of us have been forced into this. A lot of us are still understanding the impact and the trauma of the pandemic and the mental health challenges that we're all facing from it. So first is just be gentle with yourself. I would also invite them to take some type of leadership assessment. You have to understand, how do you lead yourself before you can lead others? And this is a new model. And so the styles that you may have been brought up through the ranks into a leadership position, it's a different setting. And so you might need to take a moment to kind of look and assess your leadership style and the way your behaviors kind of come out into a corporate context, and invite the 360 and invite them around, the people that are on your team. And, we do a leadership assessment for that exact purpose. What's the leadership style required in our organization right now to lead us into the future? So that would be kind of like the second step. And then I would also recommend is thinking about, the shift to the new kind of mental model. Some leaders are saying, yes, we're trying to drive high performance. I think that kind of capitalist kind of business framework is outdated and is no longer functioning. And I think if you look at the challenges business is facing and the crisis you see in society and the news, those are symptoms of a dysfunctional system. Mm-hmm. So where can we go from that? And my suggestion is a lens of, how do we raise better future generations for the world versus how do we maximize performances of an organization? And so now that's creating a more human-centered approach. And so now you're saying, okay, well, how do I best lead my staff? So I've done a leadership assessment. How do I lead myself? Now I'm focusing on how do I lead my staff, my team, my organization. That will feed into a high performance environment, right? So to kind of flip the script a little bit in terms of trying to maximize performance at the expense of people, how do you maximize people to grow that high performance? Might be a different way that people might not have thought about before. So I would just encourage to kind of sit with that and think about, how do they lead in that way, and how might that unlock really bringing out the full potential of people in a distributive environment where your interactions might be less frequent and more transactional, but you're going to generate that trust and you're going to create that social currency that will create that cohesion going forward.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay, let's dive into the audience questions. I have one here from Corey. Curious how you encourage your people to be forthcoming about aspects of their life where they need some support or some attention, such as making you aware of their need to be at the bus stop at specific times. Yeah,
thanks, Corey. Great question. So there's no magic button or pill, because if I had that, I'd be selling it really quick. So I think the easiest answer, or the shortest answer to this, is creating a culture of care. Now, that's easy to say, that's not always easy to do. And so what does that really look like? So we found through our own data and our own experience, there's certain profiles of culture that create, and we call it culture of care, that create trust in leadership. And then that creates the context for people to have that type of dialogue. So, you're talking about empowerment, and you're talking about accountability, and you're talking about all, certain kind of aspects of culture within your team or within your organization. Creating that culture of care is a critical element for those conversations to happen. If you can start to create that, they'll come naturally. Because again, you're connected to a shared purpose, a common reason why you're all together, which is, step number one, because you can create a culture of care, but if you're not aligned to a shared purpose, you just live in happy town and you're not really doing anything. So if you have that shared purpose and then you're creating a culture of care that fosters leadership trust, those conversations will happen. And people will be happy to share those pieces of information because they are aligned to the purpose and they want everyone to be successful. So that would be my suggestion. It's easy to say, Corey. It's a challenge to do, and it's not something that we hit it out of the park every single day, every single week. It's something we continually work at to make sure that we have that environment at Barrett Values Centre.
That's great. Next one is from Eric. You spoke about systems and processes that contribute to the conscious culture of a remote workforce and a face-to-face workforce as well. How do we measure and what do we measure as we seek to manage these systems and processes to continuously promote and improve human thriving?
Yeah, great, good question. So, the basic gist of it is, if we can measure it, we can manage it, we can get our arms around it, we can understand it, we can kind of move the needle on it. Lots of different components into your question, Eric. And, we have what we call a whole systems transformation process that aligns culture, strategy, systems, processes, mission, vision, values. As you create that alignment, that's what ultimately creates your multi-stakeholder kind of system, right? Where you've aligned that and then you're kind of high performing in that regard. So we use a variety of different instruments to assess our culture, to assess the leadership, to align kind of basic measured organizational or performance measures against human and organizational needs, so that it really is a systemic and holistic mapping that you can quantify it. It's not just kind of subjective and qualitative. There is the dialogue nature to it, but you can quantify that kind of information as well. So that's a different webinar, more than certainly a 25 minute Q&A session. Erica, I think our website is put in the chat, happy to connect with you and dive a little bit deeper into that. But there is a way, and that's what we're doing right now with, the leaders that are on the water's edge and know that the system is dysfunctional and need to get that greater level of alignment. We help them build that bridge. And again, it's a co-creative process. What are the needs of your organization? What's the context of your setting?
That's great. Yeah, there's a lot of questions as you dig deeper, with that question. Here's one from Kristen. Chris mentioned increasing opportunities for connection in Barrett Values Center's remote work environment during COVID when outside social connections decreased. What are some examples?
Sure. So we understand kind of relationships are really critical and key. So we've done a couple of different things. So we use kind of as much technology as possible, and certainly Zoom. All of our meetings are done with video. Now we have experienced some Zoom fatigue that some people feel, and I've not tried this. But here's a little nugget, people are eager for tactics. And so, write this one down. I've heard of people actually going for a walk around their neighborhoods with their AirPods on or their, and having their Zoom meetings while they're walking the neighborhood. So they're getting up, moving around, but still staying connected. So I personally have not tried that, but I have heard that. So I thought I'd share that with you all in case that might resonate for some of you. And if anyone's having their team meetings while they're walking around their neighborhoods, ping me. I would love to hear the story. So, but, I would hold office hours, a specific time, an open Zoom chat. People would jump in and talk about, what's on Netflix, because everyone's had that conversation, right? What's the new thing that we need to binge? Creating that water cooler type of environment. Post lockdown, as things have opened up, yes, we are fully remote. We do not have an office, and we recognize the value of person to person connection. So we have an annual retreat where the entire company goes away for a week and we get together. That's hugely important. That's one of the most important things that we do as an organization. My executive team, we get together on a quarterly basis just for 2 days because we know that's important to us to be a high functioning team, to get together and develop that social currency. So we look for and it evolves over time. It might be different. If we have this conversation in a year, we might have come up with something new based upon conversations around what do we need as a team. So those are just some of the things that we do. And I would just invite, the team that you're on to say, what would improve my social connection? We have a Slack channel. I think, Queenie, you and I, we were joking about dogs barking, right? And how many Zoom meetings have we had where someone's animal has like waltzed through the room or what have you? We have a crazy pets channel where we post photos of our pets because we all have pets, right? Those are little moments, seemingly trivial interactions that kind of create that connection. Again, kind of dropping the veil of we are just these like worker personas, and we're actually human beings and with lives and families and pets and so forth. So I hope that gives you something to think about, Kristen.
That's great. And we do have a pets channel here at CCI, just so you know. Nobody ever feels bad about posting. Next question, and I've heard this actually a few times. How do you suggest handling a situation when about half of the workforce must be in the field to handle customer issues and resent the ability of the other half of the employees who work in the office work remotely?
Yeah, good question. We don't have that challenge at PVC. We do not have a storefront. We do not have a physical location that requires a certain component of our workforce. So I can't speak from personal experience, and I understand the sensitivity and the kind of the charge around that type of a question, the energy around that, because where's that sense of fairness? Again, I think the steps that I laid out before still apply in terms of, the clarity of your purpose of the organization, how people connect to that purpose. And to me, I think is maybe the critical keystone component to unlocking that particular challenge for you. And because if the clarity of the purpose is connected to with the employee, they'll understand, are they frontline or are they remote possibility? And that, if I don't know your particular context, let's just say they're in healthcare and they just need to be in that physical space, and if they're about, improving, the quality of people's lives, and that's how they do it, well, they need to understand that that's how they connect to it. And that's the requirement of the job. Beyond that, again, it's like, these are the needs of the organization. I'm desperate to understand the needs that you have, and where do you find connection to the purpose of the mission, and how do you find the love in the work that you do, and then how do we work with that, knowing that not everything is equal, not everything is same, and then let the conversation kind of go from that place. That would be my suggestion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a difficult one, only because some people, there's the requirement, the frontline requirement, and there's the remote workspace for the others. So it might be an open brain trust call that I might invite you to, and just have a conversation with our members. Yeah. Let's see here. This one is from Douglas. Seems like most companies are experiencing the value of productivity equality from office to work from anywhere, but they are seeing impacts of ideation and innovation losses from losing those cubicle and water cooler conversations. How are you seeing business improve presence equity to drive better ideation and innovation opportunities? I can read that again.
No, that's a challenge that we have, being 100% distributed and remote. And so to me, what we've learned is that there's time for what I call kind of deeper individual work, where I'm, head down on my desk. I know what I need to do, and I can kind of handle that on my own. Then there's connection work, and some of your ideation. I think what Douglas was referring to, water cooler, or kind of kicking around ideas in the cubicle. Where do you find those moments? How do you create them? And sometimes, in a remote system like what we have, we'll take a couple different approaches. We'll thank goodness for some technology has grown. 20 years ago, we didn't have the quality of video connections and shared whiteboards and those types of things. And that can go far, but sometimes that really doesn't have that spontaneous moment. I know in certain project teams, we allocate, funds to say, okay, let's go get an Airbnb somewhere and we're going to do a brainstorming something on, and we'll have to kind of create those moments. And they're maybe not as spontaneous as you might have in an office building. But again, we say, well, what do we need? Yes, I need my sense of autonomy and creativity. The team needs some innovation and some agility. What does it take for us to do that? We're on a project team. We have to create widget X or service Y. What's going to help that happen? And so we have those types of different conversations, and it might be like, we can do some shared whiteboard stuff, and that's enough. It might be, let's get on a plane. I'm going to come down and we'll meet in a hotel and we'll do, a day and a half together and knock that out of the park. Again, we'll create those tactics around what is needed in that moment for that cohort.
That's awesome. So I think we have time for one more question. And this one is just kind of, I feel like more of an opinion here for you to answer. So for companies that are remote, but all staff are relatively local to a central location, would in-person team building be more effective than entirely remote team building?
Interesting question. So yeah, my wife has a business and they're all local, and they've gone through these exact same kind of conversations. And so whether it be team building, whether it be onboarding, because they're growing as an organization, they've decided it's like, well, what do we need to do in terms of like, what's the work I have to do today and the work we need to do as a group tomorrow? The team building stuff, I think they generally do in person because it is possible. It's kind of they're all within a 10-mile radius or less of the area, so they kind of get together. For my organization, where I might have, I have people in Europe, I have people on the East Coast of the United States. It's not quite getting in the car and meeting together at Starbucks. So, but we still do plan those types of things. Like I said earlier, my executive team, we know to be a highly effective team, we want to get together for 2 days every quarter to build that social currency, to build that team building stuff. And so we make time and space for that. But if all of my team here was local, yeah, absolutely. I think I would lean into more in-person events, in-person kind of moments. But I would be purposeful with them. I would ask what's the intention behind that, that we might want to create, and not just do it because, we have an office and so we need to have X number of hours in there together for whatever reason.
Right. Awesome. So we are coming to a close to the end of our session, and I wanted to thank everyone here who is listening in for joining us today. And of course, thank you, Chris, for such an informative and insightful session, as a lot of our businesses and their leaders are navigating through their own remote culture evolution. Really appreciate your time, energy, and leadership. And again, to be able to connect with you after our check-in call. Do you have any last words for our audience?
No, again, thank you for having me. And, to everybody out there that is kind of struggling with this, I think this is an amazing opportunity that we have at this time in leading business, to really understand the tipping point of what we want to manifest as conscious leaders. And again, my invitation is, I hear a lot of people saying, I want to create a better world, for future generations. Let's flip that a little bit. How do we create better future generations for the world? How do we lead people and involve our levels of consciousness around creating a sustainable and thriving society? So, and remote work to me is just a kind of component that begs that question of, is the system that we're operating in, is this the one? or what's the next evolutionary step. So I just want to appreciate everybody who's been on this call and working that process, and thank them for their efforts in doing so.
That's great. Thank you again for sharing that.
Yep.
So for the audience, to help the CCI team to continue to improve and provide valuable programming, please fill out the brief survey that's in the chat. It'll take you 30 seconds to do that. Also, if you'd like to learn more about the Conscious Capitalism movement, organization, ways to get involved, including the Senior Leader Network for your executives, or engage in local chapters in your region, or just learn about our partners, including Chris and Barrett Values Centre. You will find some of those links in the chat as well. But you can also visit consciouscapitalism.org to learn more, register, and start engaging. Wishing you all a wonderful rest of your week. And Chris, thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great day.